Welcome everybody. I'm very happy you're here today. As Drew said, I've done a few classes with Creative Live. I think too many to count. So I'm happy to be back. I love teaching with Creative Live. And today is all about using your flash, using a single flash to create beauty shots, beauty photos, beauty images. And so we're going to talk a little bit about what beauty images are, talk about how to use a single flash. If you're new to flash photography, you're in the right spot. If you started flash photography a while ago and you kind of put it away in the box and in the shelf and then you pull it out recently, like a few of you in the audience have already told me, then today's your day because we're going to talk about how to use that flash to create wonderful, beautiful images. As Drew said, I've been in the photography world a long time. I won't spend too much time talking about me, but just so you know where I've been and what I've done, I've been a pro for about 20-ish years, 20 years, and I do everything. I do portraits, I do landscapes, I write books, I run trips all around the world. I go to Africa and Galapagos and Iceland, all of these places. I love photography. I absolutely love it. And I love teaching photography. So today, I'd love to interface with you all. If you're watching online, send in those questions. Here in the audience, feel free to ask questions at any point in time. And we'll always try to manage, getting through the material and answering questions. But I think I do a good job of balancing those two things. So today, we're going to be spending the first section just talking about gear, because everybody wants to talk about gear. What do you need to create beautiful photos? What do you need in terms of cameras? What lenses are going to work best for this? And then, of course, what about the flashes? Because this is all about flash and learning flash. One point I want to make is that I'm not going to be spending a lot of time really talking about posing or model dynamics. We have a lot of classes at Creative Live that cover that. Today is really all about kind of a little bit more on the technical side of things. Okay. Then the next section is we're going to be talking about lighting styles for beauty shots. So you can see over here, I've got tons of lighting equipment, mostly modifiers. And that looks intimidating. And I mostly have this all on set because I know those of you in the classroom here and those watching at home, some of you may have an umbrella, some of you may have a softbox, some of you may have a beauty dish. And I'm going to try and show you how to create these looks with the tools that you have and the tools that you already own. But everything will be done with one flash today. Everything, which is pretty cool. Then we get to shooting. Later in the session, we'll be actually shooting photos with a model. We'll call the model in about 30, 40 minutes from now, and we'll create some fantastic beauty shots, bright, airy, vibrant. And then finally, I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about post-processing. And the reason why is because when you're shooting with one flash, you're kind of a little bit of a disadvantage, And so when you're shooting with multiple flashes, you can really sculpt the light. You can use multiple flashes on the backdrop, you can use multiple flashes on the subject, but when you're using one flash, well, a lot of times we need to pull in some post-processing work. So I'm going to be doing some work in Lightroom today, just to give you some easy, quick steps for how to retouch a face, how to deal with that background, get that background nice, bright, white, all of that good stuff. What defines a beauty shot? Well, I'm just going to show you actually three photos here. So let's look at these images. I'm not going to talk too much about them, just take a peek at them. Look at the photo on the right, the photo on the left. And we'll go to the next image here. Okay. So these aren't necessarily the definition of beauty shots, but what they represent, or what the common thread is that overall, they're brighter, they're close up, okay? And so most beauty shots, in terms of an actual definition, are close up. So you're not doing like a torso necessarily, you're not doing a full length, right? A beauty shot traditionally is a close-up portrait. And so what does that mean? It could mean head, it could mean shoulders and head, and every once in a while we'll go with maybe just a torso. So they're tighter compositions, head and shoulders. We're really focusing on the skin and the face and a lot of times the makeup. We're trying to emphasize the attractive qualities of that person or the attractive qualities of that model. So what are those attractive qualities? Well, it could be the high cheekbones. It could be a nice looking chin line, those types of things. And so our lighting needs to reflect that. In general, the lighting is what I would call flatter. And flat doesn't necessarily mean bad. What I mean by flatter is we don't have a lot of shadows. For example, if you had a really dramatic light scenario, think, film noir, 1940s spy movie, something like that. It's a very dark and shadowy look, sculpted. Not so much in beauty. We're not after that in beauty shots, okay? So brighter overall, flat lighting, meaning we've got lighting from the top to bottom and all around the sides. Beauty shots are typically very clean. So what does clean mean? Well, we a lot of times relate white, like white backdrops, white clothing, that type of thing, with a clean look. You can shoot beauty shots with a gray background and even with a black background, as long as you're trying to emphasize the model's face and her head and shoulders and that type of thing. But typically, you want a white backdrop. So that's one of the things we're going to work on today. I'm going to show you how to create that white backdrop with one single flash. And a lot of it, as I'll talk about, has to do with your proximity to the background and also the size of your flash modifier. Commercial, what does that mean? Well, the commercial look, commercial meaning, I'm thinking a makeup manufacturer, kind of that, they're going to put it in one of the big magazines, one of the fashion magazines, kind of that commercial, bright, sparkly look. Sometimes your beauty shots can be edgy or artsy. That's fine. Maybe you're doing something with wild colors. Maybe you're doing something crazy, wacky with the hair, something along those lines. Great. Maybe a giant, funky, umbrella colored thing in the background. That's all great. Artistic as well. Feel free to use this lighting technique and do something very artistic. Maybe you're making your own dress, or maybe you're making hair pieces, something to kind of illustrate a concept. That's all good too. Another element that needs to be talked about with respect to beauty shots is you need a makeup artist, and you need to work with a really good makeup artist. And so fortunately, here at Creative Live, we have a great makeup artist. And so getting nice beauty shots means a lot of, I'm not a makeup artist, so I don't even know the terms I'm supposed to be using here. The ladies in the room, you could all tell me, but you want to get rid of a lot of the pock marks and the blemishes and those types of things. You just want a nice, smooth, clean face. And then it's also working with the model to describe, what are we after today? Are we after, a shoulder, just shoulders and head? Are we after some type of outfit or some type of dress that we're after? So there's a lot of work between the photographer, the makeup artist, and the model. Oh, and hair as well. Hair. So this morning, just so you all know, we spent a few minutes, the three of us, the model, the hairstylist / makeup artist, and me, talking about what we wanted to accomplish. So we have a place here, it's called the green room, and that's where we do all the makeup. So we're in the green room, we're talking through it. I showed them what I call a mood board. I don't know if you've ever heard of a mood board before, but a lot of times before a shoot, I'll scour the internet and I'll look at photos that I'm after trying to create that day, and I'll just drop them all into a Photoshop document, and I'll make kind of this grid of photographs that I'm after trying to create. I show that to the makeup artist, I show that to the model, and now we're all kind of working on the same page. So then the last thing I'd say about the beauty shot is a lot of times we're trying to provoke an emotion from the viewer. You got to think through your mind, what is that emotion that I'm trying to provoke? Is it happiness? Is it joy? Is it health? Is it clean living? Is it what am I after? And so we're trying to accomplish that, of course, with our lighting and with the overall the expression on the model as well. So let's talk about gear. Let's talk about cameras and equipment. What are the things you need to know about when selecting that equipment? So what do you really need? What are the minimums? And I'm keeping in mind kind of the demographic, the people that are watching this, and what are you after? I'm not here today to show that you need all of this stuff. I have it all here because I want to show how each of them impact the photograph. But at a minimum, these are the things that I think you need. You need to have a camera, obviously, and we'll talk about camera in a few minutes. A lens, okay. You got to have a flash, and as I will talk about flashes in just a few minutes, just about any of these flashes will do. And we'll get into the nitty-gritty. I'll talk about different brands and functions, but everything we do today will literally be from this one little flash. So just get yourself a nice quality flash, and that'll be fine. You need some type of light modifier. So what are you going to pick? And if you're just starting out, maybe you choose an umbrella, maybe you choose a softbox, or maybe you just choose a reflector. I'm going to show you how to use each of those as your primary light source today to create that beauty look. And then you have to have a background. And I'll talk a lot about backgrounds, but you can see over here we've got a couple of background options available to us today. And I don't expect all of you watching to necessarily have this background roll-up special cart thing. Most of us just have a wall or a sheet, and all of that will work as well. I have this here today just so I can show you the difference between what a white backdrop will look like and then quickly go to a gray backdrop. So let's get into each of these items and let's talk about cameras first of all. So what do you need to think about with respect to a camera? Well, most of you watching, or most of you who know Mike Hagan, I'm a Nikon shooter, and that doesn't mean that Nikon is best. It's just what I've been using for many, many years. And so today I'm using a Nikon camera. But notice it's an interchangeable lens camera, so I can switch out lenses and choose different focal lengths. So at a minimum, I recommend that your camera have the ability to change lenses versus maybe like a point-and-shoot camera, or even some of the higher-end point-and-shoots that have, like the zoom lenses. They will work for this, but you don't have as much control. I recommend some type of DSLR, Canon, Nikon, Sony, or the current mirrorless cameras are fantastic. So like the Sony, the Alpha series, they're mirrorless. Olympus makes really great stuff. Fuji makes really great stuff. The key, though, is that your camera has to have the ability to synchronize with the flash system, okay? So make sure your camera has some type of hot shoe or some type of way to do a radio trigger to the flash. That's key for this type of work, because what I'm doing today, you can't really accomplish with on-camera flash. So you have to be able to control a flash that's separate from the camera body. How about lenses? Well, this type of work, let's think about what we're doing. Well, these are tight portraits, right? Just head or shoulders and head. So we don't really need to get a wider angle shot. Very rarely would you need to do a wide angle shot with beauty work. And if you do use a wide angle shot, well, then you're doing it purposely to like distort features. Those of you watching today, those of you here in the room, you probably know that if you shoot with let's say like a 20 millimeter lens or a 24 millimeter lens, what's going to happen is that nose is going to be big and you're going to get big cheeks, and it's just not going to look in the right proportions. With beauty shots, the goal is to make things look skinnier and thinner and shapelier, and you usually accomplish that task with a longer lens. So what does that mean? Well, longer means longer than 50 millimeters. I recommend starting with an 85 type of range, 85 millimeter focal length. So I've got that one here. Today I'll be shooting most of my images with the 85 millimeter, and this is the f1.8 version of that lens. If you're shopping for the stuff, you know that most of the camera manufacturers and lens manufacturers make a 1.4, an f1.4, and an f1.8. The f1.4 is very expensive. The f1.8 is not so expensive. I think I paid $300-ish, $350 for this lens, whereas the f1.4 is 3 times that, 4 times that. So that's a great focal length for this type of work. And why 85? Because what that means is I can be about 4 or 5 feet away from my model. If I shoot with shorter lenses to do those headshots, well, I got to be in really close to the model. And I better have brushed my teeth that morning, and she better have nice, perfume on. Otherwise, we're getting a little bit too close for comfort. So I like working with the longer lenses because I can back up a little bit and have some working space. How about a couple of other options? These 2 lenses I love for portraiture. One of them is the 70 to 200 f2.8. It's a really fantastic portrait lens because you can zoom in and out, and it's all around the focal length that makes very nice looking beauty shots and portrait shots. The other one that I really like working with is a 105 millimeter lens. And a lot of manufacturers make these, they're macro lenses typically. And so this is the Nikon 105 f2.8. Canon makes these, Sony makes them, almost everybody makes something like this. You can buy them inexpensively from third-party manufacturers as well. Less expensive, I should say. You know, the Sigmas, the Tamrons, the Tokinas, they're also excellent portrait lenses. So these lenses here, the 85, the 105, and the 70 to 200, these are really my lenses of choice for this type of work. Notice I'm not using, let's say, I'll pull the ones that I'm not using. I'm not using the 50 millimeter. Okay, this is the Fast 50. Everybody's got a Fast 50, right? You can buy them for $150 or something like that. And they're a great lens, but not so great for portraiture. I generally recommend the longer. And then also I'm not using like a 24 to 70. So those are lens choices and my recommendations.
Mike, I want to ask a question. What's the difference between a beauty image and a glamour image?
Yeah, it's a good distinction. So there's really no official designation between those, but in my mind, this is what I think. A glamour image to me is, I would say, a little bit more of like heavy on the makeup, heavy on the hairstyling, a little bit more flashy and glitzy. Whereas a beauty image to me is a little bit more muted and a little bit more clean, you know, tight hair, perfect makeup, but not like a lot of rouge, not a lot of flash, not bright lipstick. So,
cool.
Does that work?
Yep.
Cool. Would you guys agree? Yeah?
So just to confirm, you would use your, is this on?
Yeah.
Yeah, we're good.
You would use your beauty images for traditional headshots for actors or business headshots that would be all in the same category?
Yeah, absolutely. You could do beauty shots for headshots, for actors. You can use them, you know, in terms of the final use. It's really, sometimes, like I say, it's to illustrate a concept or an idea for a client. Sometimes it's to illustrate some type of makeup product. But, you know, as a photographer who's shooting for other people, it's nice to be able to provide that as an option for your clients to say, hey, let's do a beauty shot for your portfolio. And it's a nice, clean image that they can produce, and everything looks just about perfect.
And then one more question. When shooting with a 24-70, you wouldn't recommend that even at the 70 millimeter?
Yeah, so this is a great question. Yeah, you can get away with 70. You know, and the idea, again, is the longer the lens, the more flattering it is to the face and the features. And so if I did shoot with my 24 to 70, I'm all the way out at 70, and I'm just being careful with my angle so that the nose doesn't look too big. But 70 is slightly telephoto, and that's all good. Cool.
Thank you.
Drew.
Colleen asked, are the qualities for the f1.8 lens as good or comparable to the 1.4? Obviously, the cost is better for the 1.8, but is it worth the investment for the 1.4? So say you could afford it, is that money better spent on other gear?
Yeah.
Like, is it really going to make a huge difference?
It's the famous question, It's like, I've got $2,500 to spend on a lens. Should I get that f1.4 or should I get the f1.8 and a bunch of lighting modifiers? What I'd say is if you're early in this game, if you're just building your kit out, I would go with the f1.8 for two reasons. A, it costs a lot less and you can spend that money on other lighting equipment, which I think is actually a little bit more important. And then B, it's a lot lighter weight. The f1.8 lens is a lot smaller and a lot lighter. And sometimes, when you're shooting in the studio for all day long, your wrist can get hurt. Your wrist can hurt. It's just more weight to carry around. Your belts and everything is just heavier. So cool. I would generally recommend the f1.8, and that's how I've operated myself as a pro. Most of my stuff in the primes, they're all the f1.8 primes, just because I like the smaller size. And then I think the first part of her question was optical quality.
Yeah.
No issues.
Cool.
Yeah. They're super sharp. In fact, today you're going to see my images. I'm going to zoom into the eye, and you're all going to see every little bit of detail there.
Cool.
The one thing that I would say is autofocus speed is a little bit slower on the f1.8s. I've noticed that versus the f1.4s. We're not really shooting action here in the studio. So it's not that big a deal in the studio, but if you were to use this maybe for basketball or some other event, then going with the f1.4 where you need the AF speed and you need the extra, what is that, almost a stop of brightness, then it makes sense. So for this, go with f1.8. Save the money. I'm a Nikon shooter. 2 or 3 of my books are all on the Nikon flash system. So I know Nikon flashes really, really well, and I love Nikon flashes. I'm a guru on Nikon flashes, but they cost a lot of money. I know that, you know. So this one here that I'm holding up, this is the Nikon, it's called the SB5000. And this thing is like $500 and something. Maybe I forget the exact price, but it's like $550, somewhere around there. And then in order to do full wireless triggering on this, I have to buy some other gizmos, which kind of jacks the price up to about $650, almost $700 to be able to shoot this thing off camera with a camera like my D850 here. So you got to think, wow, $800 to have a single flash that's off camera. That's a lot of money to spend. It's good, it's reliable, it's excellent product. So the question that people ask a lot of times, well, can I get that same kind of quality of image by going with a different brand or a different manufacturer? And the answer is absolutely yes. If you're a Canon or Nikon shooter or a Sony, you can still use other brands and other manufacturers to accomplish a similar type of lighting. This one that I have over here is made by a company called Photix. This is their newest flash called the Juno, and I'm going to be using these today. So full disclosure, they sent me out a couple of units to try, and I've been working with them, and I love them. So these Photix flashes are in the couple $100 range, okay? And the cool thing about these is that they have a radio receiver built into the flash, just like the Nikons do, okay? So you can trigger these with a transmitter, and if you look over here on this camera, you can see right here on top, I've got a radio transmitter here. And you just have to program it so this is speaking in the right channel and group, and this as this. So right now I've got them both on channel 1 group A, channel 1 group A. The next thing I would say is if you're in the world of wireless flash, you know that Nikon and Canon also have wireless flashes too, and they operate in channels and groups, but the speaking technology is different. So just because it uses the same terminology doesn't mean that I can trigger my Nikon flash with the Photix trigger, okay? So they're separate. So that's one of the things you got to keep in mind is your system, whatever system you put together has to be able to communicate with all the flashes in your system. So the Photix setup, great. That whole kit right there, I'm going to say is around $300 for that. What are some other options? Let me show you. I've got a couple of other flashes here that you might consider. One of them is called an Apperlite. I bought that, I think I bought it off of eBay or maybe Amazon, I can't remember. I paid about $70 for this one, and it works great. How is this triggered? Well, it's triggered with a pulse of light. That's called a slave trigger. So in here, there's a mode called S1, and I set it up for S1, and now whenever it sees a pulse of light, it fires. So it's like the lowest level technology to get off-camera flash. It's a very inexpensive way. And really all you care about with your flashes is that it has enough power, that's one thing, and then, well, you're going to put it into some type of modifier. And so the modifier is going to really be what produces the nice look for you. The next one that I have that you might consider is the Amazon Basics, $27. $27. You could buy 10 of these. You could buy 20 of them, you know? You buy 10 of these and you're into it for less than $300. Now you've got an amazing studio lighting setup. What's the upside? Well, the upside is they're cheap. And if it fails, if it breaks, well, okay, you just throw it in the garbage and pull your other one out. The other upside is that they're fairly powerful. They put out basically the same amount of light as any of these other flashes that I have over here on the table. Another upside is it has that traditional slave mode, S1. They even call it the same, S1, and there's another one called S2. I won't go into the details yet, but they work just fine. And for 27 bucks, you can create these photos that I'm doing today with this $27 flash. So how do you trigger this? Well, you have to have a camera now that can produce a single pulse of light. So somehow you have to like shine, a little pulse of light. So this camera that I own from Nikon doesn't actually have a pop-up flash. So this camera can't actually trigger my Amazon Basics flash. So sometimes what we do is we go out and we buy maybe a really inexpensive, tiny little dinky flash, and that's our pulse flash that sends out the pulse of light so that the Amazon or whatever other system that you have can see that pulse of light and actually fire, okay? So one of the classes we did with Creative Live was all on all of these triggering systems. And I'm not going to go into the nitty-gritty today, but just know you have to have a way to trigger it remotely. Today, what I'll be using is this Photix setup, and it's a radio trigger. One other tip for you, actually two other tips for you with respect to these triggers. There's some really inexpensive ways to trigger that are not OEM, meaning not like Nikon or Canon. So let's say you have an old flash. Like I have an old Nikon SB26 over here. It's probably 20 years old, maybe even older than that, 25 years old. And it doesn't have any way internal to the flash to trigger remotely. So you can get these little I call them peanuts. That was an old term for them, but they're basically slave triggers. And you can see in the front of it, there's a little sensor there. And when that sees a pulse of light, it'll tell the flash to fire. So just about any flash in your system, if you set it for manual output, this will cause that flash to fire. And this is like 10 bucks. You can find them on any of the internet shopping sites. And then another way to trigger flashes is to buy some little transceivers like I have here. I always say this wrong. Yongnuo. Everybody laughs. I am not Chinese, but these are Chinese and they work just fine. And you can find these types of products all over the place, everywhere. Every online shopping store, every camera store, all those New York stores, they all sell something like this. And they're around 25 to 35 bucks a piece. So you have to have one for the camera and then one for the flash. Let's go to the next slide. And I've probably covered everything I want to cover here. Well, let's talk batteries. Batteries are a big deal. When using one flash, you're going to really put that flash through a lot of effort because it's going to be the only flash lighting the whole scene. And so typically you're going to be shooting at the higher end of the power scale for that flash. So you have to think about recycle time. And these flashes recycle fastest with high milliampere hour batteries. And so if you go online or if you go to your local camera store or even IKEA has a new line of batteries out and they're very inexpensive. I love them. They're the cheapest batteries I've ever seen, and I've just read some tests over the last few weeks. They're as good as most of the other higher end batteries that we're buying for a couple of bucks per cell. Well, the IKEAs are a lot less. So just get a nice set of nickel metal hydride batteries. If you are doing a lot of studio work, you might consider one of these. This is an accessory battery pack, and it holds 6 batteries. So the way this works is you put 6 batteries or 8, depending on the brand, in here. Your flash still has the 4 AA's, all right? And then you plug this little cord into the front of your flash, and this powers the flash and greatly reduces overall recycle time. I bought this online. It's from a company called Neewer, Neewer, and it was like, I don't know, 40 bucks, 30 bucks compared to the Nikon or Canon model, which was very expensive. I'm sure Nikon and Canon are watching is like, quit telling them to buy other stuff. But hey, it's reality, you know? The world is changing. We can find stuff for a lot less expensive than we used to. Since you are just using a single flash, you might try to consider keeping the power at a quarter power or less. Today I might have to bump that up to half power, but I'm going to talk about that. And you'll see if you try to shoot at half power or full power, it takes a long time for that flash to recycle. So what happens is you go to take your picture, click, and then you're like waiting for the beep. And most of these will beep. It's like 2 seconds goes by, 3 seconds go by, 4 seconds, and it's like, so how was the game last night? You know, you kind of lose the vibe. So lower power on the flash means you can work faster with the model. What's next? Camera settings. I like to keep it simple. This is your simple setup for your camera settings in your flash photography. I recommend manual exposure mode. Okay, your camera should be set to manual. Your ISO is going to be somewhere between 200 and 800. And so today I'm going to start at 200 today. Okay, not 100 and not 50. The lower your ISO, the more your flashes have to work. We also only have one model today, one person that I'll be photographing. So I don't have to illuminate like a big group of people. So I don't need really high ISOs. So let's start with 200 today. And in a pinch, I'll go to 800, but today at 2. How about your aperture range, your f-stop? I generally will start at about f5.6 for this type of setup. I'm going to be using a white backdrop and there's no real texture or detail there, so I don't have to worry about having a really shallow depth of field. Sometimes when you shoot wide open, like at f2.8 or f1.8, you run the risk of not focusing properly on the eye. I do this a lot. I make mistakes just like you all, and I'll photograph and like the tip of the nose will be in focus, but the eye will be out of focus. A little more depth of field helps cover for your little mistakes. You know, if the model kind of moves forward a little bit and you didn't catch it, well then she's out of focus and that's no good. So today I'll be around f5.6, but we'll try a few experiments and I'm just going to talk about what a lower aperture does and what a higher aperture does. Shutter speed, I say 1/200th of a second, and the reason I say that is because I know people watching today have all different types of cameras. The key here is what's your camera's maximum flash shutter synchronization speed. That was a lot of words. So what does that mean? Well, most cameras will synchronize with the flash at up to around 200th of a second. My Nikon here will synchronize up to a 250th of a second. So somewhere between a 200 and a 250th of a second. And you'll need to check your camera manual to know what the maximum sync speed is there. Why that fast? You know, why wouldn't I use something like a 30th of a second? Well, typically when you're in the studio, you want to exclude all the ambient light. All of these stage lights that are on me right now, and whatever, if you have fluorescent lights in your home studio or incandescents, you don't want those lights impacting the photo. So the way you get rid of those lights is a fast shutter speed. It's all about shutter speed. So I shoot the fastest shutter speed I can, and if I just take a photo with no flash, the room is going to be pitch black, or the photo will be pitch black, and that's what I want. I want all the light coming from the flash. And then the last thing is white balance. Set your white balance for flash. That's an easy one. Versus auto. And I like setting my white balance for flash because, let me say it this way. Auto does a pretty good job, but auto is variable. So if the model comes in wearing a red shirt, auto is going to react to that a little bit. If the model comes in, wearing a white shirt, or if I have a really tan model versus a really not tan model, auto white balance can be variable. And I hear what you're all saying. I can already see the questions on the internet. Yeah, but what about RAW? Well, yeah, you should shoot RAW. I love shooting RAW. I highly recommend shooting RAW. But even then, it's frustrating sometimes to see your colors varying from shot to shot to shot. So I just like a consistent look. So I just fix it to flash white balance. Some other camera settings you need to think about. Synchronization, flash sync. You set that on the camera body. And in my case, I can show this to you. I'm going to pull my camera out. And if you guys want, you can do a close-up shot of the back of the camera. In my case, on this camera, there's a flash button right here. And I push that flash button, and then I rotate. And when I rotate one of my command dials, I can change the setting between what's called normal sync, or front curtain sync on different cameras, versus slow sync, versus rear curtain sync. So your camera has different synchronization modes. So like what that means is when does the flash fire? Does the flash fire at the beginning of the exposure, or does the flash fire at the end of the exposure? Typically for studio shots, we're going to do front curtain sync, the beginning of the exposure. I won't go into a lot of detail there, but this is another reason why I recommend having a DSLR or a mirrorless camera that gives you those options. Shoot raw, important, especially what we're doing here with one flash. RAW gives us a lot of flexibility in post-processing to make those whites look white and not all pixelated. Autofocus, well, let's shoot autofocus single servo, okay? Single servo. And on a camera like this, here we go. For this Nikon, my focus mode selector is right here. There's a little button. And so I just push that button, and then I rotate again with my main command dial in the back, and I change between AFC and AFS. So AFC stands for autofocus continuous. That's for sports, that's for birds, that's for your puppy dog running around the backyard and you're tracking it. In the studio, we want AFS, which is single focus. So you want to like focus on the eye, lock it, and then you want to be able to kind of recompose left and right without the focus changing. In the Canon world, it's one-shot autofocus. I think Sony is AFS as well, so that's what we're after. And then the other thing is if your lens has vibration reduction or image stabilization, you won't really need that. It won't hurt you to have it on, but sometimes when I shoot with the lens where VR or image stabilization is turned on, you're sitting there taking your photo and you see this happening inside of your viewfinder. It's like moving around. And I find that to be a little bit disconcerting for me because I like to frame my photos perfectly. And when the VR is active, it's like moving around. So the model will never see it. The final image won't see it, but I like things to be a little more steady. So I turn that off. Another reason, because we're shooting at 200th of a second and the flashes are freezing any of the action as well. So there's really no reason for VR with this type of photography. How about those flashes? Should we use TTL? Should we use manual exposure? Well, the answer is yes. You can do whatever you want to do. Today I'm going to be shooting manual flash settings, manual flash exposure. Why is that? Well, I find that manual flash controls are much more consistent and reliable. This happens all the time in flash photography, especially when you're new. If you shoot TTL, one photo, it's like, whoa, what happened? She's all washed out. And then the next photo, the very next photo, it's like perfectly exposed. You're like, oh, whew, good. So then you start shooting and then it's like way over bright and then it's a little bit too dark. And the thing with TTL is TTL is very good and I use TTL quite often, but I use TTL in dynamic situations. TTL stands for through the lens metering. And so I'll use it for like event photography. In fact, just a few weeks ago, I photographed a big fundraiser event. I used TTL for that because sometimes I'm 3 feet away from the subject, sometimes I'm 10 feet away from the subject. TTL kind of figures all that out for me. In the studio, things are pretty fixed. I've got a stool or I've got a mark on the floor, the subject's standing there, the lights are fixed and steady, and then if things are too bright, well then I just change one variable and make the flash a little darker, the flash a little brighter. Whereas TTL, the way TTL works is every photo it takes, it reassesses. So maybe on one photo, the model is like this towards the camera, and maybe we're wearing black. Well, TTL is going to say, oh, I need to brighten all that up. So her face becomes overexposed. And then maybe the next photo, the very next one, she pulls her shirt down a little bit. Now we've just got skin, Caucasian skin and face, and now TTL is going to expose that probably just fine. And then the very next photo, she faces the camera, oh, it's off again. So TTL is variable, and I don't like that in the studio. So we'll shoot manual mode today. And so you're going to hear me saying things like quarter power, half power, 16th power. All that means is your flash has, it's called a capacitor anyways, and so it's got this much energy, it's got this much capacity to pump out light. Half power means it's going to literally use half of the power that the flash has available to it. Quarter power means it's only going to use a quarter of that, or 1/8 or 16th. Most flashes will go down to 1/128th power, little tink of light. Sometimes we need that little bit of light. Sometimes we need full power. So from full power to half, that's a stop. So you'll hear me today say, I'm going to drop it 1 stop. It's basically cutting that fraction in half from where it was before. Half power to quarter, that's another stop. Quarter to eighth, stop.
Can I ask a question, Mike?
Yes.
Lynn asked a question about metering the flash. If my simple light meter says 1/25th at f8, I know to set the Nikon speed light to f8, etc. But how do you know what the corresponding power of the flash is, 1/25th at half power, etc.? I'm confused about how to meter the speed light correctly.
Okay, cool.
So we were just sort of talking about that. Wondering if you could answer that.
All right, Lynn. So I didn't I didn't put anything in here today about using a flash meter because it adds a lot of complexity, and we don't have a lot of time today to go through everything, but I will at least touch on it. First thing that I would answer is you can get most of your exposure stuff done just by looking at the back of your camera. Literally take a picture, look at the back of it, turn on your blinkies or your highlight screen, and that screen will then blink at you if there's any like areas that are overexposed. Over the years, I've gotten really good at just kind of judging exposure by looking at the back of my cameras. It's not perfect, but it's pretty good. And when you shoot RAW, RAW is a great CYA tool, cover your anatomy tool. It's a way that if you do slightly blow out the highlights, you can still kind of get them back. Or if you do underexpose, there's still some leeway there. So you don't have to be so dedicated to your light meter. But that said, let me answer your question specifically. Every light meter is designed to measure how much light is coming onto the subject. And after you click the little button here, the flash fires, you typically will hold it in front of the model, right? You hold it like this, and then the light's shining on the model. You click it, and when you click it, it'll give you a number of, it'll give you 3 numbers. It'll tell you what your ISO is, it'll tell you what your aperture is, and what your shutter speed is. And Lynn, it's just responding to whatever flash power you had dialed into your flash. What I mean is if your flash was set for quarter power, then this will tell you how to set your camera. That's all it does. If you set your flash for full power, then this will tell you how to set your camera in response to that. So whatever your flash power was, this tells you, then go to your camera and set it that way. So, you know, it may say f5.6, and then you increase your power up, and then it changes the aperture. You reduce your power, and it changes the aperture. That's typically what we're changing, is just the aperture. One more thing on flash settings. Yeah, so manual mode, we're going to be shooting that today. Typically, I'm between a 64th power and a quarter power. You'll see how that works. And then if you're TTL, like if you're like, I'm a diehard TTL user, Mike, I'm going to use TTL no matter what you say. All right, I'm going to say go for it, but make sure your subject fills the frame. What I mean by that is don't shoot like a wide angle shot that includes a bunch of the dark background. Because what will happen is the camera will see that background and try to illuminate all of that in addition to the little tiny model in the scene. So a lot of times your model will be totally washed out. So if you're using TTL for this, then shoot tight, just head and shoulders, that type of thing. And that goes the same for event photography or nature photography or whatever. TTL with flash you basically need to help the camera understand what it's supposed to be exposing, and you usually keep it tighter.